Great, thank you very much, Heloise, and thank you very much for organising this wonderful conference. It's been a fantastic day. So this talk is not, I'm afraid, going to give you the answer to what the law should be on prenatal testing. And in fact, there's not going to be very much law in it at all. I'm rather going to look at one particular facet of the debate, and particularly over aspects around contemporary parenting culture, or at least a dominant theme in that. And in the interest of disclosure, I've got 2 children with Fragile X syndrome, which certainly, oh, what have I done now? Oh, this one, I've done what everyone else has done. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk a bit about a strong theme within contemporary parenting culture. And then want to look at how ethics of care will challenge some of that theme, and then tie that into prenatal testing and parenting and disability. So there's a number of themes that I think combine together in contemporary parenting, certainly in the West, and I'm going to talk particularly about the UK, which I think conceive of parenting as a task of producing the perfect child. That the job of the parent is to produce a successful child understood in one particular way. And there's a whole set of themes that combine, which I'll sort of draw out, but they all sort of play a part of this bigger picture. First of all, this theme of parental responsibility. And I've put up here a quote from David Cameron, but you'll find plenty of examples of this where politicians will claim that the bad behavior of children is a reflection of parents, that children will behave in the way that parents have brought them up, that it's the parents' job to produce good citizens, and where children don't behave as we would like them to, that is the fault of the parents. We can find that backed up in the law. We have Section 3 of the Children Act, which emphasises the idea of parental responsibility, that parents should understand themselves primarily as having responsibilities to raise their children. Now, in many ways, that's a good idea, because it emphasizes the point you shouldn't see yourself as a parent as having rights over your children, but rather as responsibilities over your children. But we're seeing this idea of parental responsibility being increasingly used, the idea, well, parents are responsible for how their children are created, or are raised. And we can see that in all sorts of areas. We can see that in the law. I Googled what happens if your child commits a crime. And it was interesting that the government page that comes up warned you about the serious consequences for you as a parent if your child commits a crime. It warned you could be subject to parenting orders, you could be sent on parenting classes, you could be financially responsible for your child. It's an interesting response. It wasn't, oh, you poor parent, if your child's committed a crime, let's offer you help and support, let's help you navigate this. It was immediately, right, well, you're clearly to be blamed. We see, too, the growth in parenting classes. And I've quoted from the top there, from the advertising campaign of one parenting class, where the message very is you need to be taught how to be the best possible parent, because how you raise your child will hugely influence how the child turns up. Also give an example there from a court case. A father had behaved badly during the marriage. He'd been abusive to the mother and the children. On separation, the children didn't want to see the father. And interestingly, you might have expected the judge would to say to the father, well, I'm very sorry, your children don't want to see you. It's probably your fault that you behaved so badly during the marriage. But it wasn't. The judge turned on the mother and said, well, look, you ought to be getting your children to want to see the father. And again, I've quoted from the judgment that it was the mother's fault the children didn't want to see their father because she wasn't doing enough to try and persuade the children to see their father. A second theme I think we've got is the vulnerability of children and parents' roles to protect their children, be that protecting children from the stranger danger, lots of evidence of how children are spending increasingly less time outside and especially alone, parents having particular now responsibilities to protect their children on the internet. And again, the government websites on child internet safety is all about how you as a parent must make sure you've got controls on your internet access, keeping an eye on what your children are doing. It's interesting, in the corporate sphere, you have great departments dedicated to protecting the company, great experts employed to protect children from cyber dangers. But for parents, the internet is a dangerous place. Parents need to be protecting their children. We can see this with medical advice. There was a government document recently on obesity, warning parents that if you are obese, your children will become obese. And again, it's your job to remain healthy as a parent so that you can raise your child healthily. There's increasing evidence of the stress that parents are feeling. And I think in a way it's partly because parents are almost destined to fail. Faroudi in this article talks about how contemporary parenting culture almost presents parenting as something you need to be an expert in doing. You need expert advice. And many of the guidance that's issued to parents is almost destined for parents to fail. Tough love is a common theme to read in contemporary parenting advice. But it's this almost impossible balance. You're either going to be too tough or too loving. And you've got to strike this balance where you're almost doomed to fail. The infamous Jordan Peterson, in his book, has a chapter entitled, "Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them." Well, if that's the principle you're going to try and live by, I fear you'll find you're constantly failing. We have increasing interest in this idea of hyper-parenting, whether that be helicopter parents, whether that be the tiger moms that have been written about. Parents who dedicate themselves to the success of their children. And we are seeing, I think, often a competitive cycle between parents, that the success of a parent is your child doing better than anyone else's child. And this, no doubt, just feeds into this culture of ever more work being done to try and get the best opportunity for your child so they are top of the class, winning the awards in this, that, or the other. I'll skip over that. We're also, I think, seeing the technologizing of parenting. That to be a good parent now almost inevitably involves technology. Having tracker devices on your children so that you know where they are, checking on their phones, having a baby monitor so you can check where the baby is. It's becoming an increasingly expensive as well as a stressful activity. So all of these then are combining to produce this model of parenting being a job. It's about creating the perfect child, and preferably better than everybody else's child. That it's a task for which you need expertise help, and you need technology to help you to do your job really well. Now, I'm sure not all parents are like that, but I think that's a dominant feature in our contemporary culture. And I think it's woefully misguided. It's an awful, awful vision of what being a parent is like. And so I challenge it by the use of ethics of care, and particularly some of the themes that come from ethics of care. The starting point, I'd argue, for ethics of care is the claim that we are all universally vulnerable. We like to claim that there are groups, normally people over there, there's the vulnerable people over there. They need to be looked after by us, the able and the strong. Whereas the claim of universal vulnerability is that, in fact, we're all vulnerable. None of us can exist on our own. Now, there are societal structures in place which greatly privilege some people and greatly disadvantage others, so that many people's vulnerability is far less evident because they've received lots of benefits from society. And other people who are disadvantaged by the way society is structured. And this, of course, feeds into the social model of disability. But because we're all vulnerable, because none of us could actually live very long on our own, caring for each other is essential to our well-being. Care is the crucial essence of what we are. So I disagree with what Roger was saying earlier when he was talking about agency being the key thing. No, I think it's care. It's caring together, which should be the fundamentally most morally valuable thing that we're doing. So as I often tell my students, if the government were to announce no accountancy week, it would be fine, we'd all survive, we'd be okay. Some people might lose a bit of money maybe, but it wouldn't be disastrous. But if we were to announce right next week is no care week, that would be absolutely disastrous for our society. And yet, care is something that does not get valued or recognized. Now, key to my thinking on care is that what's crucial are caring relationships. We shouldn't see care as something that one person does to another. That's not good care. Caring relationships are two-way things where people are giving together. That's what actually produces human thriving. If you're just the recipient of care, a passive recipient of care, or even if you're just a giver of care and you're not seeking to receive anything back, that's a very anemic, weak form of care. So what does this idea of modern parenting culture tell us about prenatal testing? Well, I think it does explain perhaps some of what's going on. That these messages from society that your job as a parent is to produce a really successful child as understood by society, where society so disadvantages disabled children, of course you're not going to want to have a child who's going to have those disadvantages. If you're judged, your success, how your friends will view you, is how well your children do, well, why would you then select a disabled child? So, what then would an ethic of care tell us about what parenting ought to look like? Well, I think fundamentally, we should see then that parenting should be a two-way relationship. Parenting is not something the parent does to the child. It should be a relationship where you learn together. It's something where the parent should be learning from the child. I remember a lecture I gave once, so I was asked to give the sort of closing talk on parenting and care, and I listed that morning all the way my children had looked after me that morning. We think of parenting about parents caring for children, but there's huge amounts of ways that children care for their parents. There's huge emotional labor that my children put into looking after me. There's huge ways that they educate me and teach me and change me. And that's how we should be understanding parenting. Not as your project to produce the perfect child, but learning and growing together. And that's what care is about. Care is not about a project of trying to do something to someone, but getting to learn with them, to work together. How can we overcome the problems that we both face and the challenges that we both face, rather than it being a one-way activity? And I think it's interesting that parenting, that childhood often ends up being a place where the adult concerns get placed. So this is a headline where children are facing the toxic combination of depression, online porn, and bullying, a charity claimed. As if these are problems that adults are not facing. It's so easy to put our concerns as adults onto children and not recognize them as our own. So one of the real problems, I think, with the contemporary model of parenting is the idea that we adults, we grown up, we parents, are really good at knowing what a successful life is about. I remember sitting down with some professionals, first time we did it, discussing our children, and then said, right, the goals for your children, we should be trying to get them into employment and to get them independent living. And at the time I said, yes, yeah, that's right, good. And then I thought about afterwards, actually no. What's particularly good about having a job? What's particularly good about being independent? Actually, no, I want my children to be funny. I want my children to enjoy the wonder of the world. I want them to laugh. I want them to give people cuddles. I want them to leave people they've just met with a big smile on their face. Actually, that's what's really good. The model we think of as a successful life for our children, great careers, good salary, having their own home, those are narrow, shallow views of what a good life is. And actually, I think that's partly what my children have taught me, that actually those things don't really matter. What really matters is love and friendship and caring and cuddles and laughs and giggling and flapping and having fun. And we impose our adult agenda because we think we've got it right, rather than being open. And this is what ableism, I think, is about. The assumption that the abled have it all right and they know what's best and they need to sort of give things and help the disabled, rather than being open to change themselves. I hope you'll forgive me if I conclude with an anecdote involving my daughter. She doesn't like labels, but her IQ is low, well below what's recommended. But she's very, very sociable. And she likes traveling on buses, and she always looks for someone interesting to talk to. So one Sunday morning, she was on the bus, and she saw a priest, and she thought, that'd be interesting. And so she sat next to him. And she got talking, and she said, are you going to church? And he said, yes. And then she said, are you going to give a sermon? And he said, well, yes. And she said, well, I've got some advice for you. First of all, keep it short. All the sermons I've heard are really, really too long and very boring. And then she said, keep it simple, because all the sermons I've heard are too complicated. And then she said, well, actually, I think what you should say is just tell people to love each other. That's all you need to say. And then she looked at me, she said, and then, Daddy, it was very funny. He had this big, big smile on his face, but there were tears coming down his cheeks. And I think we know why. Thank you.